Welcome to the Billion Insight Podcast. I'm your host, Shree. First of all, we'd like to wish all of you a very happy new year. May this year will be filled with positive energy and new opportunity. So today, we are honored to welcome Dr. Alan Smale, a distinguished former NASA scientist and astrophysicist. Dr. Smale has dedicated years to exploring the mystery of black holes and cosmic phenomena, serving as the director of NASA's High Energy Astrophysics Science Archive Research Center. In addition to his scientific contribution, he is also an accomplished author and a passionate science communicator. Alan is the creative mind behind many alternative history novels, reimagining the past with gripping works like Class of Eagles, Trilogy, and Apollo Rising series. From ancient Rome to Apollo moon missions, his stories make us to reconsider the possibilities of what might have been. His writing reflects a lifelong curiosity about history, space, and human potential. Get ready to explore the fascinating intersection of science, art, and storytelling as we delve into Alan's insights from years in science and how he inspired others to think beyond the stars. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Alan Smale to the show and let's roll the first episode of the Billion Insight Podcast for the year 2025. So welcome, sir. Welcome to the Billion Insight Podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on. This is going to be great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our show. As a tradition in our show, we like to start with your childhood a bit. So let's take a trip back to the beginning. You were born and raised in England, right?
Yes, I was. I was raised in Yorkshire, England. I'm actually going back there fairly soon. I currently live in the east coast of the United States. But yes, I grew up in England, so I had spent all my childhood in the north of England, and then I went to Oxford University where I studied physics and astrophysics. I've always been very interested in the sciences as well as in writing. I was always interested in astronomy and the Apollo program when I was a kid, and that's obviously come out in some of the books that I've been writing and have had published since then. So that was a lifelong interest that I'm really now leaning into. As a child, I had a pretty happy childhood. Everything was fine in that area. I enjoyed my life up in Yorkshire, and I'm going to be happy to revisit it. Revisit Yorkshire, not my childhood. That'll be different.
Yep. So, sir, if I'm not mistaken, you grew up in England in 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So it was right after the first Apollo mission. I mean, the successful Apollo mission, where we landed on the moon.
Yes, and I do remember the moon landing. I remember the Apollo 11 moon landing quite well, actually, because it was a big deal in England and all over the world. Yep. And so yes, that did form a part of my childhood, and I was very much into this. I would collect newspaper cuttings, I would collect photographs, I would watch the news, I would buy the books and all of that kind of thing. So I was very interested. I was fascinated by the Apollo program even back then. And some of my friends, when I was 11, 12, whatever, 9, they do actually remember me saying that one day I wanted to work for NASA. I actually have no memory of those conversations, but they insist I did, even though that was kind of an unrealistic expectation for somebody who grew up in Leeds.
Okay. So what I'm saying is the Apollo mission shaped your career. I mean, in that moment, you kind of decided that you want to explore in that field, right?
I did. I was interested in many things in those times. I was already writing like fan fiction and things like that in those days. But I was very interested in the sciences, and I knew that I wanted to be a scientist of some kind. I knew that was where I was really leaning. I was always interested in astronomy. I was also interested in aeronautical engineering and a number of other things, in chemistry for a while, meteorology. I did read fairly widely in all of those areas, but I guess it's no real surprise that I ended up in the physics domain, and specifically in astrophysics research, which is what I then went on to do when I moved to the United States.
Yep. Speaking about astrophysics, if you don't mind, I have few rudimentary questions about that. So, can you explain what is the difference between astronomy and astrophysics?
Astronomy and astrophysics. Astronomy is really more the positional. I mean, if we're being rigorous about this, it's more the positional kind of, it's the constellations, it's the spherical trigonometry that we use. It's the It's really the observational side. You can have a hobby as an astronomer. I think it would be hard to have a hobby as an astrophysicist because you require so much training for that. I have a degree in physics and I did my PhD in astrophysics, and I did a lot of coursework. There's really is a lot of math, a lot of physics involved, and a lot of my working life was spent doing research into that kind of physics, into studying like what happens to matter under extreme gravities, extreme temperatures and pressures. So that's where the physics part really comes in, and that can be some quite high-powered stuff. But astronomy is much broader, I guess. Astronomy also covers the solar system. It covers the sun. It covers all kinds of things. There are a lot of amateur astronomers who get a lot of pleasure out of looking at the sky with telescopes, and they're genuine astronomers. They're probably not astrophysicists, although some of them may be.
That's interesting. So, sir, let's dive into your career at NASA. So you have worked for NASA for like more than 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Quite a bit longer than 20 years, actually. I came over to the United States to work for NASA when I was 28 years old. And I'm not 28 now, as you know, because I grew up in the Apollo era. So I am, in fact, 64 years old now. So I had a 35-year career at NASA, and I enjoyed it very much. I came over to work on a shuttle mission, in fact. It was STS-35. And that had a science payload that actually had an astrophysics payload sitting in the shuttle bay. And so I was working on that. I was the experiment controller for that, controlling it when it was actually in space and taking measurements of X-ray binaries and other exotic things in the center of the galaxy and beyond our galaxy. And so that's what I came over to the States to do. And from there, I moved on to other projects. I moved on to other science missions, onto astrophysical satellites in the 1990s. But it was the 1990s by that time. So I worked on various other missions, including ROSAT and XTE and Chandra and other things that are basically acronyms. But those were satellites that were up in the 90s and well into the 2000s that I played a strong part in, and I was analyzing the data from those satellites and doing astrophysics with them. And as you noted at the beginning, I eventually came to be the director of an astrophysics archive towards the end of my career at NASA. I was the director of the HEASARC, which is the High Energy Astrophysics Science Archive Research Center, which is basically a lot of nouns mashed together. But what it is, it's one of NASA's big three data archives. There's MAST, which is the archive for the optical data, like from the Hubble Space Telescope and things like that. And there's URSA, which is NASA's infrared archive. And then there's the HEASARC, which does all the high energy astrophysics data, X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic ray background, all of that stuff was in the HEASARC, and I was the director of that at the end.
That's very interesting. So how does the data from HEASARC help scientists to make discoveries?
There are a lot of X-ray satellites that are up right now, and and people who are analyzing those data get their data through the HEASARC. So they get data from active missions through the HEASARC, but they also get the legacy missions. The HEASARC has all the data from X-ray astronomy missions going back to the 1970s. It has well over 50 missions worth of data. There are many, many terabytes of data in the archive. And so people can tell a lot by looking at how an object has changed its behavior over decades by comparing the data back then to the data we have now. And the data we have now is a lot better in some ways. The spectroscopy data has far better resolution. The imaging is much better. If any of your listeners have ever seen the images from the Chandra X-ray telescope, those are beautiful. They're every bit as beautiful as the pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope or the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, which is now up in space. And so people can compare data now with data then. They can also combine data across wavelengths. They can also look at the X-ray and optical and infrared data from the same celestial source, from the same target in space. And so they can see what's happening across the electromagnetic spectrum. They can study the high energy, the low energy, and the different energy bands tell us different things about what's going on in these objects.
That's very interesting. So, sir, I'm just wondering, the HEASARC mission is kind of shaped many missions, right? Or do you can pinpoint one mission that one of the most exciting discovery made by the HEASARC data? Can you pinpoint one?
Yes, I think I can. There are actually many, but a lot of the data that I was most intimately familiar with came from the Rossi X-ray Timing Explorer satellite. That was launched in 1995 and was up until 2012. And the data from that mission that had extremely high time resolution. And so we could see the kind of objects I look at are black holes and neutron stars, essentially. They're binary systems that contain a very compact object. And one of the things we discovered from from our XTE data was the extremely fast oscillations down to milliseconds. And these are not like pulsar oscillations, which were known about before. These are oscillations that cover like a narrow frequency band, but they move around a lot. They're called quasi-periodic oscillations because they're kind of periodic, kind of not. And it's kind of detailed, but by looking at data like that, you can tell how the neutron star is structured. And I'll go back and tell you that a neutron star, many of you may know this already, but a neutron star contains as much mass as our sun, but it's in a star, in an object that's only about 10 kilometers across. So it's extremely compact. This is where the high pressures and temperatures and especially high gravitational fields come from. And we can tell this is a different type of matter entirely inside a neutron star. And we can tell more about the neutron star equation of state, what's going on, what the real physics is inside those objects. So it's a little obscure in a way, but it's really interesting high energy physics that we're able to tell from these objects and from the data that we got from the X-ray Timing Explorer satellite.
That's very interesting. So, sir, those data the HEASARC has produced, does that accessible for the regular people?
Yes, anybody can go and access those data. You need sophisticated tools to analyze them, but the tools are also downloadable from the HEASARC site. It's essentially a public website. All NASA data is public after. Sometimes there's a proprietary period for the initial investigators to complete their work, 6 months or a year. But after that, all NASA data is supposed to be public, so you can get at any of these data. And the website is HEASARC, HEASARC, HEASARC.GSFC for the Goddard Space Flight Center, where I used to work, .nasa.gov. So that website is the entry point for all of the data that I'm talking about for all of these many missions. And there is actually a thriving astronomical community who are analyzing archival data. And we actually used to answer a lot of questions from India. There are a lot of high-powered research facilities in India that were especially interested in Exosat data and XTE data and data from various other missions, SWIFT data, and so on.
That's interesting. So it maybe happened that the data which is processed by the HEASARC for maybe decades ago, but the result, the output of the data can be produced in the future also, right?
It's actually very impressive because we kept statistics on this, like how the data are being used. And it turns out that even 10 years beyond the end of a mission, when a mission is terminated, it closes out. The satellite is no longer working. 10 years, even 10 years after the ending of each of those missions, there's still like a substantial amount of number of scientific papers being published. Maybe 30% of like the maximum publication rate. They're still publishing a 30% of that. People are still publishing at that rate using those data after that many years. So yes, the data do have legs. They do have longevity. They're still interested because new techniques come up, of course, new scientific techniques, new physics that people have learned about. They want to go back and look at the old data. And so, there's a lot of interest in the older data too.
Advancement of the AI also will help decode so many things.
Yes, machine learning and artificial intelligence was one of the things we were really looking into, how to apply that to X-ray astronomy data. Machine learning is very good at classifying things, like classifying different types of galaxies and that kind of thing. But there's also some quite detailed physics that you can get into using AI. It's not generative AI, which kind of invents things, if you like, projects things. It's analyzing the data you've got and looking for patterns in there. And machine learning is very good at picking up on those patterns and guiding people to know where to look next. And it can actually save researchers a lot of time, kind of telling them, look here, this is interesting. This object is different from the other objects. Let's go and see why. Yes.
Because the AI is very good at pattern recognition. So, Sir, I want to understand a bit about HEASARC mission. So you mentioned that through satellite, they kind of observe the entire cosmos. I mean, the visible part of the cosmos from the place where the satellites are deployed, right? And by that,
yes, these satellites.
It facing all the data and transfer that into the Earth, back to the Earth. Then you guys are curate the data in a way so that it can be understandable by the human, right?
Yes, most X-ray satellites have been in low Earth orbit or very close to the Earth, or they're in eccentric orbits, which take them a long way away from the Earth. And nowadays, there are several that are actually in the L2 points, the Lagrange points, and these are gravitational points that are well away from the Earth, so that there's less interference from the Earth, from the atmosphere, from the heat, and so forth. So there are ways of doing that. But to answer your question about the data, yes, NASA is something that NASA has pushed quite a lot, and that the HEASARC has pushed quite a lot, is data formats, the kind of universal data formats. So you may have data from 5, 10, 15 different missions recently, but they're all in a very similar data format. So the tools that work on one mission's data will also work on another mission's data. So you don't have to learn different software for each new mission. You just use one set of software for all of the missions, and the data are in a very uniform kind of format called the FITS format that people can then analyze. If you can analyze data from one mission, it's relatively straightforward to transfer that knowledge to analyzing data from a different mission. And so, yes, it's a very uniform archive, even though there are so many different missions and over so many decades.
That's very interesting. So, sir, can you tell us, when you work as a director of HEASARC, how was your day-to-day life looks like?
Actually, it varied quite a lot. There were a lot of things that I was involved with. Right up until the end, I tried to keep my hand in and actually do some research on the data myself, use the tools that the HEASARC itself was putting out to analyze data. I thought it was very important for us all of the scientists that work there, to keep that kind of expertise up. So I would try and do some research. I did less towards the end because I was getting more and more mired in bureaucracy. There were a lot of things that I had to deal with on the kind of management side as well. I was managing about 30 people. I was interacting with folks at NASA headquarters, the people from the direction from NASA headquarters and so on. So some days I would spend quite a bit of time analyzing data. Those days were probably in the minority. I did actually, you'll be unsurprised to learn, as a government bureaucrat towards the end, I did have to go to a lot of meetings. Things got very interesting during the pandemic, of course, because we were all working from home. And actually, it's fairly straightforward to do a lot of analysis that we want to do because it's all on computers. We can all link up on Zoom or whatever it may be and work together. But there was a certain, there was a certain period at the beginning there where we were figuring out how to do that best. But having conversations with my colleagues, preparing for new missions, part of what we were doing was helping new missions get ready, ones that haven't been launched yet. So I'd spend a while talking to new missions, talking to the people who have missions coming up in the late 20s and early 30s. So I'd do that. I would go to science talks because it's very important, as I said, to keep up with the science, not just in my own field, but in other fields. So it would be that kind of thing, managing people, doing science, going to meetings, going to talks, preparing for the future.
That's very interesting, sir. So now, since you're retired from NASA, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I am. I retired from NASA in August of 2023, and so I'm now a full-time writer, which is something that I've wanted to be for some considerable time.
Since we're talking about the HEASARC mission, one thing I just remember is that when I was a child, I was fascinating with one thing. I don't know who told me that, but it is called the wow signal. Are you familiar with that? Wow signal.
The wow.
Yeah.
Wow, W-O-W. I'm not sure what that is offhand. Do you have any more clues? What it was?
Yep. It is an unidentified radio signal which came from out of the space. And till this date, we do not know what is the signal is and where it is actually came from.
I kind of vaguely remember that, but I don't have any insight into it. I wasn't doing any research. The electromagnetic spectrum, obviously radio is on one end and X-ray is on the other. So I would probably have paid much more attention if it had been a signal in the X-rays. But no, I don't have any insight into that.
But that is the HEASARC mission is precisely there. They are kind of decoding the signal from which is coming from out of the space. It may be a natural signal or maybe from the unidentified source, which we may not know.
Yeah, I suppose so, yes. A lot of people, when they're analyzing data from astrophysical objects, they're proposing to do specific kinds of investigations, and then they're analyzing the data of those investigations in mind. So the HEASARC provides the data and the tools. It's scientists all over the United States in various universities and all across the world, Europe, Asia, who are actually doing a lot of the data analysis. We do a fair amount of data analysis at Goddard. A lot of scientists are into that, but also most of the analysis obviously is done by people around the world.
Yep. So since we are talking about the data, in last 1 to 2 years, we have heard a lot of news about the alien theory in Mexican parliament. They have shown a body of the alien, and there also report that NASA also kind of confirmed that. So what's your take on that?
I don't know. Do I believe that there is alien life out there? I think the odds are that there probably is alien life out there. We've discovered one of the big discoveries over the last couple of decades is the number of exoplanets out there, the
Yeah.
sheer number of planets there are
Yeah.
around other stars. And so, given all that, I think it would be astonishing if there was not alien life somewhere.
Yeah.
Whether it's visiting us or not, I don't know. I have an open mind about it, but there's also a lot of fakery and chicanery. There's a lot of rumors that turn out to be nothing or prove to have natural origins. A lot of UFO sightings have been debunked or disproved. So I don't think I've seen anything that convinces me yet that aliens have visited the Earth. And I certainly am not on the inside of any kind of top secret area 41, 51, 91, whatever. I don't know much about that side.
I mean, there were strong speculation. I mean, a conspiracy. I don't know, lack of better word I'm using it. But NASA kind of, caught that alien and hiding from the world.
I suspect we're not. I suspect if NASA did have such information, they would want to tell the world. It may be that I'm speculating here, but politicians, I could imagine why politicians might want to keep it quiet. But for NASA, that would be great, right? I mean, if we did discover proof of alien life, that would be, first of all, we would really want to know more about it. We'd really want to investigate it. We might want to communicate with them. We would want to know what they could tell us. And it would, and being on the pragmatic side, it would raise interest in space science generally. And that would obviously be in NASA's interests. So I don't think NASA is covering anything up, and I don't think it would be in NASA's interest to do that. I think they would want to blow the whole thing open and be public as possible, as quickly as possible.
Last 2 years, there were the report were coming. They want to distract the people from the real issue. By bringing this, people will be distracted from the real issue. So that would be the case.
Yes, I think there's a lot of misdirection, a lot of conspiracy theories, there's a lot of weird stuff going on out there in the world at the moment. And so, I think this is a part of that.
Yeah. So, sir, what advice do you have for young people who are interested in pursuing career in space industry?
Well, the obvious one is to work hard at school and get good grades, find out what you're really interested in and pursue that path. A lot of the people that I work with at NASA, and me myself as well, we've had it as a passion for a long time, and we've kind of followed our passion. Even though we're scientists, we have passion for it. And so I think it requires a lot of determination and a lot of study. Sometimes there are setbacks. I do know people who actually didn't do very well at school, but who persevered. The traditional way to do this is to go to a university and get a PhD and then move into an academic position. But there are also lots of people who came at this from roundabout routes. They started out as data technicians and just learned more on the job and kind of worked their way up the system that way. So a slightly less academic path, but one that eventually got them to where they wanted to go. And people who did master's degrees and still involved in the things they want to do, but perhaps are not doing science research, but they can still be involved in missions. NASA is very much a mission agency, and there are many roles in there for many different kinds of people, including engineers and money people and materials experts and all kinds of people. So there are ways of getting involved in the space program that are not directly involved in astrophysics. But yes, I think the real answer is to do your research into what universities would be good for you. Go to university if you can, and don't give up on your dream.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So speaking about the university, speaking about the degree, what do you think, considering the advancement of the AI, everything has been done by the agent? I'm sure that you must have heard about the word called agent. So they kind of are deploying multiple agents. They are specialized in so many things. So my question is, this field, the AI field, is rapidly advancing. So we would come to a day where they will surface us that we call it the AGI, the artificial general intelligence, the artificial super intelligence. So if that day come, what do you think? How relevant would be a full-time degree?
I think it would still be relevant in many ways. I think we're a long way away from that point. What we have at the moment with generative AI is basically a really good text generation system. And there's really not that much intelligence under the hood. There's a lot of smart stuff going on. There's a lot of CPU cycles and all of that. But what we're not seeing is genuine human intelligence. If I'm reading a piece of fiction, I can easily tell whether it was created by a human or an AI. Even if it's not very good human fiction, I can still tell that there's a human being behind it. And it's less easy for me to tell when it comes to a piece of artwork, because art isn't something that I do. But and I think artificial intelligence is growing better in leaps and bounds, but we're not really seeing genuine intelligence there. And I'm not sure whether we will in my lifetime. But Well, in answer to your question, what effect I think it will have, I think we will still need humans. I think we will still need smart, dedicated humans to push science forward, to come up with new ideas that probably artificial intelligence might not be able to come up with on its own. AI, I think, is a tool. I don't think it would be a good master, and so I think it's definitely still. I think it's definitely still relevant for people to develop their minds, to be smart, to go to universities, to get degrees, to further themselves in that kind of way. So I don't see artificial intelligence taking over from us in that respect, and I wouldn't want it to.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we may not see that kind of a leap forward in our lifetime, but how they're exponentially advancing in every moment. So
yes, eventually maybe they will be able
Yeah.
to do a whole lot of things a whole lot better than they do right now. The whole cognitive thing, though, there's a lot of things we don't really understand about human intuition and about human how ideas come, like innovative ideas come to human beings. Particularly in the writing world, I read a lot of things that my fellow writers have written, and I think and they're just kind of completely out of left field in a lot of ways. And it's hard to see how an AI could come up with that degree, how an artificial intelligence could come up with that degree of originality and inspiration. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe one day in 10 years, 30 years, or 100 years they will, but it's not something I'm particularly worried about right now. I don't see that happening at the moment.
Yep. There is a prize called ARC prize, ARC prize. Do you know about that? The ARC prize. It is there to prove a AI that it is as capable as a human. So there is I don't know exact price, but there might be some $100 million will be given to the people who crack that AI who can be as good as the human.
Okay, yes, I have heard of this actually.
Yep. So the ARC prize consists of several puzzles which can be easily solved by the human. But up until this day, there is no single generative AI model that can solve that puzzles. So interestingly, from last week in the mid-December, the OpenAI has declared a model called O3. It is their advanced thinking model. They call it O3. So it allegedly solved 80% of the puzzles which is made by the Fox and ARC puzzles.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I guess if you since they know what the puzzles are that they're aiming to crack, they can kind of tune the AI to be able to work on puzzles like that. So it is very impressive. But yes, also there's a difference between that and sending an AI out into the world and having it attack or manage to deal with any puzzle that you give it. So I don't know. Obviously, things are. I'm not diminishing. I'm not not in any sense attempting to denigrate the advances that have been made. And I think there's a lot of impressive stuff going on. And as you or I said, it is going on in leaps and bounds. And we're going to see a lot of change over the next 3 years. And I don't know what that change is going to bring. It's going to be an interesting time to live through and see.
Exactly, sir. Yep. So talking about the AI, so how often do you use the generative AI in your day-to-day life?
I don't use it at all. I used it when it first came out, when the Chat GPT thing first came out. I used it to see what it was like. I gave it a couple of small story prompts just to see what it would do with them. But I don't use AI at all for either for my own writing or for just entertainment purposes. I use it accidentally and unwillingly when I go to Facebook or another site and it summarizes people's responses for me. So I guess I do occasionally read things that are generated by AI, by artificial intelligence, but I don't actually use any of it myself. I'm old school in that regard. I like writing my own stuff, and I will continue to do that. So I'll never be using AI for my own for anything like that.
Yep. Sir, have you heard about the OpenAI Sora and Google's Veo?
Yes. I'm certainly aware of those.
Yeah, by just a simple prompt, you can make a Hollywood level of visuals.
Mm-hmm.
That
is extremely impressive, and I'm sure that Hollywood will be very interested in that, and I'm sure it'll be a lot cheaper than the. I know that there are a lot of animators and there are a lot of people doing special effects work who were working in Hollywood, and a lot of that work has been farmed out to other countries now. And I'm sure if Hollywood executives can farm it out to AIs, then they will do so, and they'll probably come up with some extremely impressive effects that way. So
Yep.
I don't know, not really my field, but yes, I do imagine that there'll be a whole lot more of that going on in the future.
You are a scientist as well as author. you are deep into the creative work. So what do you think? I mean, how this technology will, as we discussed, is growing exponentially. So what do you think the impact it will put into the creative industry, and what would be the role of the traditional artists in the future?
The traditional artist and writer, I think there's still going to be a market for that. I think there is quite a lot of resistance in some areas. I know that a lot of writers and artists themselves are obviously resistant to it because it's attacking their livelihoods and attacking their own means of self-expression. So all of that. And so I know a lot of people are quite threatened by that. The effects it'll have on the industry, I know that there are some people who are planning to put out lines of books written entirely by AIs and thinking they will make a lot of money that way. I don't know how interested people are going to be in AI, in fiction that they know is generated by AIs. It's going to be an interesting experiment to see whether they do manage to make money that way. I think actually, to be very honest, it probably doesn't affect people like me as much because I'm already established in my field. I've been writing short fiction since the early 1990s. I've been having novels published by Random House and Kasich. We'll get to that, by various, well-known publishers for over 10 years now. And so I have my name, such as it is. People know who I am. They know if they read something from me that it's going to be something that was written entirely by me. And other authors who have been around for a while. I don't think it affects us as much. I think it does affect the people who are younger than us, or at least moving into this kind of area now, who are beginning as writers, because they're competing. There are a lot of short story magazines, for example, that are getting flooded by AI written submissions by people who are submitting stories that are written by AIs. And so they're having quite a lot of difficulty weeding those out. And so I imagine that this actually has quite a depressive effect on the market as far as new authors coming into the industry or new artists coming into the industry. Because if people can make a book cover, for example, using AI, then if publishers can do it that way, then maybe they will. And so there is less for the traditional artists. There is probably going to be less work for the traditional artists who've been relying on that in their livelihood. So there's going to be some interesting stuff that we're going to see, and there's going to be but a lot of people in the industry I know are very concerned about this. Every science fiction convention I go to, there are always panels on the effects of AI on the art industry, on the writing industry. It's coming, and people have known it's coming for some time. So there's been a lot of debate about it.
At the end of the day, you have to navigate the AI in a way. I mean, you have to give the input from your brain, right? Everybody now has a great camera. That doesn't make them a photographer, a world-class photographer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. Similarly, AI can do some through a prompt. You can write definitely a story and one or other, but ultimately, the great story comes from the here. You have to navigate in a way so that the same tool used by a normal person cannot produce that much of quality of story compared to the one who is really passionate about it.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yes, I believe that as well. I believe that very strongly.
Yeah. So, sir, do you think platform like Netflix will ask you, what's your mood? You will say that I feel like peaceful. I would like to watch some love story and all. So then the Netflix will be ask you that what kind of love story you would like to watch. You will give a prompt like, I would like to see the movie, the scale of Titanic, but the set will be set in the gravity. Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet will play the role. And the Netflix will immediately create a movie similar to that. It's the scale of a Titanic, but it's completely made for you. It's a completely unique movie based on your prompt. That day will become. What do you think?
Yes, I'm sure that day will be coming. I doubt that I'll be watching those movies, or I might out of a little bit of interest just to see what they look like, because like you say, I'm sure the visuals will be really impressive. Whether the human story will be as impressive, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people come to this kind of thing. They love the special effects. I love the special effects. You probably do as well. I love a good special effects movie, but what holds people's interests really is characters, it's human beings, or whatever. They're interested in the story, in the human side of the story. And I'm sure that can be replicated. A lot of stories can be fairly, there can be patterns to those stories, and you can replicate that kind of pattern using artificial intelligence. But whether you can really get the human emotion in there, I guess that remains to be seen.
Yep. So, sir, speaking about the creative industry, now let's explore your books. You have written many alternative history novels, and your writing style is characterized as a hard science fiction. Your most recent work is The Radiant Sky, the second book of the Apollo Rising series. Before we delve into that, could you explain what alternative history is and how it differs from the traditional history? Additionally, what defines a hard science fiction?
Hard science fiction, I suppose. Let's start with that. Hard science fiction is science is fiction that is based around science. It differs from fantasy because in fantasy you can have a world with magic. You can have a magic system that doesn't necessarily extend from logical things. Doesn't necessarily conserve energy, for example, if you're creating fireballs from nothing. Hard science fiction, I think you need to absolutely have an idea of the science behind it. And without the science, I've seen definitions which are that if you take the scientific element out of science fiction, you have no story anymore. And I think science fiction does a lot of exploring of the consequences of scientific advances. So back in the 40s and 50s, writers were writing about space travel and giant computers, and artificial intelligences perhaps, and robots, and considering the societal impacts and all of that kind of thing. There's a lot of less hard science fiction, which is thinking about like what other planets would be like. There's a lot of space fiction about other planets and about travel to those large giant structures in space built by aliens, like a lot of the classic stories of the 1970s and 80s. So hard science fiction, I think, can be. It really has that science as the background. Like, how was this thing made? How was it created? What would it be like to have telepathy or time travel and that kind of thing? I think those can both things that have a physics or a rational basis behind them. And I think more lately, I think we've seen a lot of science fiction about cloning, about climate change, and we have dystopian fiction, which I think also counts as science fiction. And so the appeal of that to me is obviously the science side. I've always been very interested in science. So I read more science fiction than fantasy anyway, and I read a lot of other stuff, but that's where my interest has come. Alternate history is a history that never happened, essentially. The idea behind alternate history is that you take an event in history and change it. So there's a point of departure. And that point of departure can be just happening right now, or it can be it kind of happened sometime in the past. I had a short story that came out last year or the year before, just as an example, called Gunpowder Treason, which was about the gunpowder plot in England in 1605. And in the gunpowder plot, very famous Guy Fawkes, who is a historical figure, a real historical figure, he and his comrades attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and that didn't happen. But in my short story, I explore what would have happened immediately after and in the years after if the gunpowder plot had succeeded and there had been this huge explosion in London. And the point of departure doesn't have to be recent. In my Clash of Eagles books, the point of departure is actually 1,000 years ago. And we're in a world where the Roman Empire has survived in its classical form until the 13th century. And so essentially they're what-if stories. It's historical fiction stories where things have gone in a different direction. There's been one change to history. History has changed as a result. History has diverged as a result. And you're exploring what happens in this new history. I think the appeal of it is that it holds up a mirror to the real history. That what-if aspect is kind of intriguing to see how events could have unfolded in a different way. And we do a lot of that in our own real lives, thinking about, if I'd made a different decision, in my 20s, I probably wouldn't be in America. What would my life be like now? And you probably do that, and other people do as well. So I think it's one way of looking at history is to consider how history could have been different and work through the ramifications of that.
That's very interesting, sir. So one alternative history I have witnessed is from All the Mankind from Apple TV Plus. Have you seen that series? Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that series, and in fact, it's kind of interesting. People who've seen that series, who've seen that TV show, This Is for All Mankind on Apple TV, they might also be interested in the books, in my most recent books that you're talking about, Hot Moon and Radiant Sky, the first two books in the Apollo Rising trilogy. I'm writing the third one now. That was kind of parallel evolution. We're talking about parallel universes. I started writing Hot Moon, the first book, in mid-2017 after I finished the Clash of Eagles books, and I heard about the Apple TV series sometime after that. And the show trailer, I think, came out in June of 2019. But anyway, by the time, and it seemed I was a little worried about it because the premise seemed similar. The idea behind both, for people who haven't seen or who aren't familiar with my books, is that the Apollo program continues. The Soviets continue with their moon program. The Americans continue with their moon program after Apollo 17, and we end up with bases on the moon and that kind of thing. By the time the Apple TV series premiered in November of 2019, I'd already sent off the entire Hot Moon book to my agent and to my beta readers. It was published in 2022, but the wheels of publishing turn slowly. And so the thing I find fascinating about it is they come from a very similar premise, like what would happen if the space race continued, but they go in completely different directions. The Apple TV series, that has a lot of action and a lot of adventure, but it's a lot of, particularly the first two seasons, are set largely on the Earth, and there's a big soap opera family kind of thing behind them. My Hot Moon books are set entirely on and around the moon, and they're much more action adventure. There's a smaller cast. It's kind of claustrophobic in a way because the Apollo and Soyuz spacecraft of those era were very small. They were very confined spaces. The storytelling is it's on a large scale, if you like, because it's set on the moon or in orbit around the moon. But you're dealing with the technologies of the time. So when we have the world's first space battle, it's with extremely clunky technology, and things actually move very slowly because that's what happened in those times. If you're changing orbits, you have to change orbit very slowly, and there's limits to what you can do. So I found it very interesting storytelling in that kind of a universe where you are very limited by the technologies of the times. And that's hard science fiction because it is a fictional story, but I tried to make the science and the technology as accurate as I could in the stories.
That's very interesting, sir. I have seen that all the mankind very long time ago. If I'm not mistaken, they have shown that Roscosmos first landed in the moon, then the NASA, something like that. They is shown in that series.
Yes, it jumps. Actually, one of the cool things about For All Mankind is the way it jumps between Series 1 and Series 2. I'm going to say, I may have got this wrong, but it's something like 10 years has passed. And so you get new technologies and new developments. And then, by that time, you're well into the 1980s or something. And then you jump another 10 years and we're going to, or thereabouts, and then we're going to Mars. And then there's what happens when we have the Mars colony 10 years later. And you see the same characters go through these large time jumps as well, and how they've developed. And I actually think they do that very well. It's very well done, and I think a lot of the effects when they're on Mars are very well done. In my books, the time jumps are shorter. The first book starts in 1979, and the second one starts in 1983. So the technologies have developed. We can do far more on the moon. We can go much further on the moon. We have better technologies and equipment on the moon. And all of my stuff is based on what NASA had actually planned to do on the moon if we carried on going there. So we're seeing a much smaller time frame. And in the third book, which I'm writing now, we get to about 1986, 1987 by the end of the three books. And so everything takes place within a decade in the Cold War period of the late 1970s and early 1980s.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you are planning for the third book, right? I thought it is originally a duology. So you plan it trilogy?
Actually, no. To be very honest, I actually planned it as the Hot Moon as a standalone. That was my original intention. I was writing a different trilogy as well, and I finished the first two books of that. That unfortunately has not had a buyer yet. That's also alternate history. It's set in the 4th century AD in a Mediterranean where Rome actually didn't exist, and the main powerhouses are Egypt and Carthage and Persia. Never mind, we won't get into that. But at the same time as I was writing those books, I was also writing the first Hot Moon book. And I actually intended that to be a standalone. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It has a nice arc. So there's a nice ending to it. And when my publisher at HEASARC Science Fiction and Fantasy, when we started getting really nice blurbs, I got a blurb from Larry Niven and various other people who are great in the industry and really good, well-known authors. And it attracted a lot of attention from reviews and things like that. He said, of course, we're going to want another one of these. And I said, let me go away and think about that. And I actually didn't agree right away. I went and reread Hot Moon and thought about how the technologies would develop over the next few years, how the characters would change. There's a lot of the same characters who are in common in all three books. And so I actually spent a fair amount of time. And it was funny when I went back to look at Hot Moon, it was almost as if I put little hooks in there for myself, because I did see various ways where characters could go and what the storylines would be. And so I wrote the whole treatment for the second book. And in that, there are a couple of paragraphs like, well, if you want a third book, here's what could happen. But he bought the first book as a standalone, and then he bought the second book, and then we agreed that there would be a third book, and I'm writing that now. So the three books do have an overall story arc, and I'm very happy with the way those are going to work out. But in fact, that was not planned as a trilogy, unlike my Clash of Eagles books, which are set in ancient America in the 13th century, with Roman legions coming in from the Chesapeake area and coming into contact with the Iroquois and the Mississippian cultures. That I intended as a trilogy right from the beginning, right from when I pitched it to Random House. I pitched that as a 3-novel series, and they bought 3 books. And when we did that deal, that was a 3-book deal, and it was bought as such. But no, the Hot Moon series, the Apollo Rising series, there were 3 separate contracts. They bought that book by book.
That's very interesting, sir. So both the Apollo Rising and the Class of Eagles, they both are based on the alternative history. So, sir, what
Yes.
inspired you to write the alternative history as your primary genre?
I found myself getting more and more into it as time went by. When I was writing short stories in the 1990s, some of those were horror, some were fantasy, some were hard science fiction, some were alternate history. And one of the reasons is I just felt drawn to the alternate history. That seemed very interesting to me. And when I would just get ideas, and those ideas would often be stimulated by history. The idea behind the Clash of Eagles series was that I read 1491 by Charles Mann, and there's a whole chapter in there about Cahokia, the Native American civilization built along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers around about 1218 AD. And this was a mound building culture. And so they had these big mounds in the city of Cahokia and in various other cities. And Cahokia itself had 20,000 people in it. And people don't necessarily think about Native American cities in ancient America having that many people in it. And actually, some people accused me of inventing Cahokia. I did not. But as soon as I read that, I knew that it was a wonderful setting and that I really wanted to set a story there. And so it's just the things that most appeal to my imagination. Appeal to my my interests, because I've always been interested in history as well. And there's actually a second answer to that question, which is that I was working in a very heavily science-based industry at the time. Obviously, I was working for NASA, and I was thinking about science all day, every day. And so, if I was writing hard science fiction at the same time, I would feel like I was doing the same thing in my writing life as I was in my work life. And so, I wanted to do something completely different. And I don't think you can get a lot more different from modern day astrophysics and Roman legions marching into the Mississippian region
Polar opposite.
in the 13th century AD. So yes, they were very different, and so I found that also very mentally stimulating.
That's very interesting. So, sir, do you believe that the alternative history helps us understand the real history better?
I think it does, actually. I think it does. And I think there's various theories about how history works, essentially, how history develops. And some people think that history is very resistant to change, and that if you take out a couple of people here or there, it actually doesn't make that much difference because the same things would have happened. And in some cases, that's true. In some societal things, you can imagine are going to happen even if you take out a few key figures. Once you get to the United States, people are going to build railroads because it's time to railroad. You know, the technologies are there, and it is an obvious thing to do. So you can't really have an alternate history of the United States without railways, or anywhere else in the world without railways, really. You can, though, imagine politics working out in a very different way. You can imagine without certain people in the 18th century, the whole map of Europe would have been different. Without certain people doing certain specific things in Indian history, presumably India might look a great deal different today. And so sometimes what a person does, or even what the weather is like on a particular day, there's a lot of battles, a lot of major battles which have affected the fate of nations beyond. A lot of those battles have been affected by the weather, whether it was foggy in the morning, whether the light was coming into the soldiers' eyes when they were fighting them, all these other imponderables that have gone into it. And particularly today, when we have, like, when American presidents or other people who have an immense amount of power, Putin or whoever it is, can decide to invade countries or decide to do things that affect large populations of the world, you can see how a single person can have a great effect on history. And that's a roundabout way of saying that I think alternate history does help us explore these things and the role of important humans in history, and see just how fragile or how robust history might be. And as you can tell by now, I think a lot of things in history have been very contingent, actually, and we could be living in a very different world if a few people had made different decisions, or if things had worked out very differently 1,000 years ago. The world we're in now might have been very different. And I think it's fun to analyze that.
Yeah. In philosophy, we call it butterfly effect.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, the
Yeah.
butterfly effect. The idea that it actually comes from a Ray Bradbury story where I think you want to check me on that, but there's a science fiction story where a time traveler goes back and treads on a butterfly back in the dinosaurs, the time of the dinosaurs, and when he returns to his natural timeline, he finds a lot of things have changed as a result. So, and the other idea is that a butterfly just flapping its wings in
Yeah.
one part of the world can have a major change on the weather that happens in another part of the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there you go. Yes.
Yep, yep, yep. So, by the way, sir, this is my second podcast episode featuring someone who is experienced working at NASA.
Ah, good.
Yeah, previously I did an episode with Adina Mignona, who is also has a background in NASA, and she's also
Hmm.
a science fiction author like you.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay, the story is A Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. I just looked it up. I just
yeah,
wanted to correct myself there.
yep,
Yes, Adina. Yes, I actually know her. I've met her at science fiction conventions. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
yeah,
Please.
yeah, yeah. She's also, I mean, fantastic author as well as a personality, I would say, just like
Yes.
you. Yeah.
Ah, thank you.
Yeah. So earlier I was thinking that I mean, why more and more NASA scientists are becoming a science fiction author? So you told your reason that since you kind of bored doing what you are doing, and not bored, I mean you just want to experience a different kind of thing than
Yes.
your usual work. So you just did a completely, I mean, polar opposite work. You just went to the history, and not just the history, that is the alternate history. Yeah.
Yes, I've always been interested in writing. As I say, I used
Yeah,
to
yep,
used
yep.
to write
That's,
stories as a
yeah,
kid, and so I'd always been interested in that, and always knew I wanted to try and become a published author one day on
yeah,
the side. And I think a lot of scientists actually do have side interests. There are a lot of scientists I know who are very into music. I think math and music have a lot in common, and a lot of scientists are very mathematical. So I actually know a lot of scientists who are into music or into writing or do other things in that area. And there are scientists. There's Jeffrey Landis, who is another person who works for NASA who writes science fiction, and there are a couple of others
yeah,
that spring to mind as well. So it does take a lot of time, and scientists often find difficulty getting that much time. There are a
yeah,
lot of scientists who do research at evenings and weekends, and I try to avoid doing that so that I could do the writing side of things that I also wanted to do. But yes, it actually doesn't surprise me. There are a lot of people who are interested in science who have completely different backgrounds, and a lot of scientists who are interested in other things. I think a lot of people, naturally, probably a lot of people who listen to your podcast as well, have
yeah,
very, very different and widespread interests. And so I'm never surprised when I find scientists writing fiction as well.
yeah, yeah. Sir, I would bet that while writing your novel, you must have gone through, I mean, tremendous research about the past event that occur. So, my question is, what is the most surprising thing you have learned while researching about your books?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of things I've learned while researching my books. I did learn a lot of fascinating stuff about Native American cultures when I was writing the Clash of Eagles books. I obviously knew that there were a lot of different North American tribes and nations, and I knew there was a lot of diversity. But when I really drilled down into it and did more research, there was even more diversity, even more interest, more developments and differences between the various groups than I had realized beforehand. So there was that aspect of things, I suppose. They're kind of interesting little things that you find out, which is that, and things that you could never put in a book. And one of them is that Romans actually had umbrellas. Ancient Romans, they actually had umbrellas. And you can just imagine that if I wrote a book set in ancient Rome and had people with umbrellas, it would jolt people out of the story because they'd think it was an anachronism. And there are a lot of things like that you find out that people were actually a lot more advanced back in historical times than we realize now. A lot of the Romans, a lot of the people the ancient Romans who were at war with the Germanic peoples and other peoples in Europe at the time were actually quite advanced, but you don't think of them as advanced because it's the Romans who wrote the history afterwards, and so you think that they're all barbarians, but they actually had quite respectable towns and cities and civilizations of their own before they got crushed by the Romans. And there are various other places in history where you just learn how rich history was, and it's how three-dimensional it really was, and how much agency the people that lived there have. And so that's another reason why history is continuously interesting to me, is that I'm always finding out new things about about people, about like how the Dark Ages weren't really dark, how there was a lot of life going on there, how people were very smart during that time, and there was a lot of beauty, even though a lot of written records didn't come down to our times. And so one of the things I often say at science fiction conventions is I love reading. The thing I love about history is that it's always changing, and it is because we're always learning more about history, and our view of history changes with time. And so there's a lot about it that I just simply find fascinating.
Yep. By the day past, we discover artifacts and all, so that proves another theory. So that way we discovered a new history.
Yes, like in the, I don't know whether this is tense political areas for people who live in the Indian region, but like Mohenjo-daro, for example.
Yeah.
When I grew up, the Mohenjo-daro culture, the idea was that culture was wiped out by invading groups, and I don't think we believe that anymore. It was much more of a natural assimilation. And I read books when I was a kid. One of the things that got me interested in time travel was a time travel book set in Mohenjo-daro, and that assumed that the culture would be annihilated from outside, and that I guess turns out not to be the case. And it's fascinating when you think that an entire belief, something that important about history, turns out to be just incorrect, and we find out new evidence about it, and it totally changes how you think about it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't want to make this political, but I just, since you are talking about Mohenjo-daro, I just remember one quote from the Churchill. He also criticized India when India was invaded by England, the UK. So that point in time, Churchill made a statement that India has missed the bus of civilization because there is no civilization at all in India. So up until 1927, we haven't discovered the Mohenjo-daro civilization. But after that, everything has changed. I mean, the whole new history has added to the course of the history. Yeah. So
yes, very much so. No, I've always thought of India as being one of the cradles of civilization, along with the other places in the Middle East.
Yeah,
that's how that was. By the time I was learning about it, we knew that, so that's good.
Yeah. And we don't know how many other civilization may have buried in our feet.
Yes.
Yeah,
no, that's true, and we're finding out a lot of new stuff these days from radar, from being able to go over like large areas of land and tell about what the land usage was like that long ago. With a lot of our information about the size of cultures, the distribution of towns, that kind of thing is changing a great deal, like all over the world, like in South America and India and Asia and all of that. We're learning a great deal about history, and I'm sure there's a lot more buried there that we haven't found out yet, and that there are various other things that we believe now about history which will turn out to be erroneous when we get more data. Data is important.
Absolutely, yeah. So, sir, talking about your class of eagles, what is the starting point of that book?
The starting point of the book? You mean how I got the idea, or where the book itself begins?
The idea and where the book is actually started.
The idea came from reading Charles L. Mann and really getting interested in the Cahokian culture, which I mentioned before. The book itself starts on the shores of the Chesapeake, which is like this big inland bay, actually not very far from where I live. And a Roman legion under the command of Gaius Marcellinus is landing on the Chesapeake Bay, and they're going inward. They believe there is gold in North America, and they believe this incorrectly. What happened was when they encountered a Viking ship which contained a large amount of gold, and the reader is going to know that gold came from South America, but the Romans believed that it came from North America as a result of killing everybody on the Viking ship, and the Vikings have helped the Romans. That's how the Romans are able to get to North America, is that they have Viking assistance. And so in the beginning of the novel, the Romans are setting off west through the trackless wastes, as they imagine it, of North America. And so the legions are marching. It's very difficult marching. And of course, the people that live there already are none too fond of this. And so they're coming under attack at the beginning, it's by the Iroquois, by the Haudenosaunee nation. And so they're getting attacked by various people along the way. And eventually, of course, they come to Cahokia, because it's clear that since that was the impetus behind me writing the books, a lot of the clash is between the Cahokian culture and the culture of the Romans themselves. And the idea behind it, I think, When Europeans in our timeline invaded North America, they came with very different motives. The English and the French and the Spanish all came with different ideas, whether it was trade, whether it was educating, I'm making air quotes here, educating the natives in air quotes again, or converting them to Catholicism or whatever it was. They all came with very different ideas about what they wanted. And for some reason, when I wanted to write about Cahokia, it just made sense to me that I'd want a completely different civilization coming into it. And the Romans have very different motives again. And what happens in North America, obviously, but progresses in a very different way because it's the Romans who are coming in and because the first people who are coming over are very military. And so that was the idea behind the books, and I knew it was a big idea, and I did write an original novella, and that novella won the Sidewise Award for Alternate History, which is the big alternate history award. But I knew at that time that I wanted to develop that novella into books, and I knew it was going to be a 3-book series that I wanted to write because the idea was just so big, and there were so many stories to be told.
Yep. Absolutely. During you working in NASA, you wrote so many books. So my question is, how does NASA react to its employee pursuing creative projects?
They don't actually object to it. There's a form that you actually have to fill out. It's called something about like approval for outside employment. And you would have to do that for anything that generates you money if you work as a federal employee. And so if you want to go out and do public speaking and it's outside your area of work, or if you want to start a company to do something, or if you want to be an author, you fill out this form and it gets signed by your supervisor and your supervisor's boss. And so you get approval for that kind of thing. And it helped, of course, that I was writing historical fiction, and that was completely different from my day job. So there was no difficulty getting that paperwork signed. It does mean that people at NASA are interested in what I'm writing. And now I'm writing the Apollo Rising books, which obviously have a strong NASA component. They're even more interested in those books. And one of the reasons why I'm so keen to make sure that everything in it is factually correct is that I know that some of my NASA colleagues will call me out if it isn't. So that's why one of the many reasons why I try and make those books as accurate and have the technology as realistic as possible. I was not involved in the human space flight projects professionally, but I was working at NASA. So I do have that kind of NASA mindset and background, which helped a lot when writing those books. So yes, NASA, my friends at NASA are very interested in the books, but I never encountered any resistance from NASA in terms of being a writer.
Yeah. Since you are a scientist and you're working for NASA, I'm sure that the Apollo Rising must have to be the scientific accurate. But what about the class of Eagles? Have you consulted any historian during the course of your research?
I have not personally consulted. Is that actually true? I probably have talked to people. I actually did talk to one of the women who works at the National Museum for the American Indian in Washington, D.C. about some stuff. And actually, I have spoken to several now that I'm actually thinking about it. Yeah. I did talk to various people. I also read a lot of books. I read something like 150 books in preparation to write the Clash of Eagles books. Some of that was while I was writing the books, and some of that was beforehand, before I started. Because for one thing, there were a lot of things I didn't know, again, about the Native American cultures, and I wanted to make sure that I got that as accurate as possible out of respect for those cultures, and also to make the books as realistic as possible. And so I did a lot of research in those areas, but also into Romans. There was a lot. I knew a lot about Roman culture through growing up in England and through going to Roman remains in England. But I also had to do a lot of additional work there to try and make my Roman legions and my Roman characters. I have a large cast of characters of both kinds. So I have something like 100 named characters over the course of the 3 books. And I wanted to get all of that as accurate as possible. So I did do a huge amount of research there. So probably like a quarter to a third of the time that I spend writing or working on these books is actually reading, is actually doing research and making sure, putting in those details which will give it realism and making sure that I've got things right.
That's very interesting. So, sir, how do you make sure that your books are enjoyable by the reader with no backgrounds in science and history?
I try and I talked a little bit about characters earlier on. And so I think it's the characters that draw people in. In the Clash of Eagles books, to begin with, it's the character of Gaius Marcellinus. Later on, there are Native American characters we meet, and a lot of those are very sympathetic. We see the world from their view as well as from the Romans' view, but we start off very much in the Roman mindset. And I'm hoping that the character of Gaius Marcellinus, he has this almost impossible task. He's marching into North America. He doesn't know how far he has to go. He has Norse scouts, but who are going out ahead. But it's obvious that he's going to have great difficulties with his supply chain. He's going to have great difficulties because his men are getting picked off by skirmishers, by Native Americans. He has a huge problem ahead of him. The initial problem is that he has to get all the way over to Cahokia, which is in the middle of this very large continent, essentially. And even for the Romans, that's a big ask. And so pulling it in with Gaius Marcellinus, with Aelfric, who is a Celtic character who is working with the Roman legions, with the other characters, we get to see the world through their eyes. And later on, we get to see the Cahokians. And it's really, I think, their characters and their reactions and the interconnections between all of the characters, which I think makes the books interesting. That and the battle scenes, of course. And it's the same in the Apollo Rising books. There we're in the viewpoint of Vivian Carter, who is the first US woman to lead an Apollo mission. So she's the commander of Apollo 32, and she's coming to the moon on an exploratory mission to the Marius Hills region, which used to be a volcanic region of the moon. She's not the first US woman on the moon. She's not the first US female astronaut. There have been several beforehand, but she is the first to command an Apollo mission. And so she is the commander. She's going to go to the Marius Hills, but they end up in a very difficult situation very quickly because there is a Skylab. There is the US had Skylab missions. It was the first space station in the 1970s. Skylab was a big part of the late 1970s in the US, and there is a Skylab in orbit around the moon. And while Vivian Carter is there bringing supplies to that Skylab, some Soyuz craft, some Soviet Soyuz craft, show up with hostile intent, and so her mission immediately gets derailed in the first part of the book, in the first chapter of the book, in fact. And she's in great danger herself. You can tell she has a great rapport with her two male crewmates, and so the interactions between them, I think, I believe, are kind of interesting, and that pulls the reader in. And there's a lot of problem solving in both these books. In fact, the NASA astronauts, in sticking to the Radiant Sky and Hot Moon books, the NASA astronauts are unarmed, whereas the Soviets do have weaponry. And so the NASA astronauts have to figure out what they can press into service, how they can use what they have around them to defend themselves. And that's a problem-solving thing. It's like The Martian by Andy Weir. It's like they're trying to deal with the astronauts are trying to deal with how they repel a Soviet attack using only what they have with them. And when we get to the lunar surface, there's that as well. When we get to the base at Hadley Rill, where there's 18 Apollo astronauts in a base down there, and that is where Vivian and her crew end up for a while, and they're very much trying to figure out how they can defend themselves against a Soviet ground attack on the surface of the moon. And so there's a TV show called MacGyver that I'm not sure whether you had in India, but MacGyver was well known for inventing things. He didn't use guns, so he would invent things, mechanisms to protect himself, to fulfill his mission or whatever. And so there's a lot of that in these books. There's a lot of what I hope are compelling characters in a difficult situation, trying to figure out how to survive with just what they have around them.
Just very interesting. So, sir, as you mentioned that you are currently working on the third book of the Apollo Rising, do you have any name for that?
Yes, I do. The first book was called Hot Moon, and the second one is Radiant Sky, and the third one is currently called Burning Night. So you can see the connection here. It's all like heat and radiance and all of that kind of stuff. So Burning Night is the third one at the moment, and there's a very good reason why it's called Burning Night, which readers, I'm writing it now. I am about 2/3 of the way through the second draft, and I'm supposed to deliver it by the end of January. And it has a publication date. The first book came out in July of 2022. That was Hot Moon. And Radiant Sky has just come out in November of 2024. And the third one has a much shorter. We want to get the third one out quite quickly. So that has a publication date of September the 26th, 2025. So I haven't finished the book, but I have a publication date. I think that's the first time that's ever actually happened to me, that I've had the publication date before I finish the book. So no pressure, right? Still working on the book, but yes, we're hoping that it comes out before the end of this year. That's the goal. And that'll be the third and final book in the Apollo Rising series. That will bring the story of Vivian Carter to a close, I believe.
That's very interesting, sir. We are looking forward for your third book. And I haven't read your first or second book of that. And I'm really excited about after this podcast, I'm really planning to read that.
Great. Well, I hope you do, and I hope you enjoy them.
Yep. So, sir, do you have any tips or any guidance for the one who wanted to write their own book?
Once again, it comes down to perseverance. I've been in a lot of writers' workshops over the years. I've talked to a lot of people who wrote a lot of great stories, but just didn't persevere with it. I actually I was one of the winners of the Writers of the Future contest back in the 1990s. This is for short fiction. It is a worldwide contest. You can apply for that now, people. And I actually advise to do so because it is it's a great great thing. But the reason I mention this is because in the Writers of the Future that I did in 1995 or so, I was in the class with there was this workshop that we had afterwards, the winners after around the time of the prize giving, and a lot of those writers I haven't heard anything from since. They obviously wrote publishable stories back in those times that got interested in something else, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's no reason why you have to go on and become a writer. But I think talent is obviously important, and learning the craft is important, and having interesting ideas. And I think you need to be honest with yourself about whether you really have that kind of mind. But if you have those things, I think perseverance is a lot of it. I think I've been very lucky in many ways, and a lot of writers who have got published will say, they've had a fair amount of luck along the way as well. I got an agent for the Clash of Eagles books, and I got a publisher. They're published by Random House, Del Rey. And all along the way, I thought I was very lucky. I worked very hard, but I also felt that I was very lucky to have made those, to have those people be interested in my work. And so it does require a certain amount of perseverance and believing in yourself. And also only write what you're really, really interested in. I think you could tell from what I've been talking about that I was always very interested in the Romans. I was always interested to learn more about Native Americans, and all my life I've been interested in the Apollo project. So only write about things you're passionate about and in genres that you know a lot about. I wouldn't recommend that you start writing mysteries if you haven't read many mysteries, or romances if you don't love romances, or science fiction if you don't know a lot about science fiction. So write in your favorite genre. Write the thing that you're really interested about, and in a topic that you're interested about, because God knows you're going to be if you do get into the business world, into that world, and if you do get sell a book, that's not the end of it. You're going to be editing your own words quite a lot. So you have to maintain your own interest in your own work during that time.
Yeah, that's a very fantastic piece of advice, sir. Thanks for sharing that. Perseverance and the thing which you are passionate about it, these are the crucial things. Yeah. That's a very interesting.
Yes.
So, sir, after the Apollo Rising, do you have any other crazy idea for your next book series?
Crazy it is. I am actually quite surprised. This may sound arrogant, but I'm actually quite surprised that the books I was talking about earlier hadn't sold yet. These ones, those stories, is at the moment the working title is A Million Burning Scrolls, and it's actually set in Alexandria, in the Library of Alexandria in the 4th century AD. And Hypatia of Alexandria, who's a famous mathematician, she's a historical figure, is actually the lead character in these books. And this is a book in which Carthage survived and Rome did not, when Carthage won the wars back in the 2nd century BC. So that's when the change in history occurred. But the books are set in the 4th century AD, and the world powers there are Carthage and Egypt and Persia. And it's sort of it's not steampunk exactly, but it is in a world where the technological developments have been a little more rapid as a result. So we do have the very, very earliest beginnings of steam. We do have other kinds of steel has been discovered a little earlier, or been developed a little earlier. So there are various changes in that world, and there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of action adventure. And again, there's a lot of problem solving, because that's what I write. I write smart people solving problems. And so that's what these books are about. And I think what I would like to do, I've written the first couple of books. I would like to finish that and try and sell the trilogy, the completed trilogy as a whole, to a small press. I guess I already know that Del Rey isn't interested. I know that the big players, it's not going to come out from one of the big 5 publishers, but I'm hoping that a smaller publisher will be interested in those books and take those books based on the good sales that I've had for other series up till now. So that's something that I would like to do. And I also have a book coming out at the beginning of January next year, which is completely different, which is which is actually it's a short novel, and it's kind of out of left field compared to what we've been talking about now, because that is actually cryptid fiction. It's about an animal. It's about a type of animal that actually doesn't exist in the real world, and it's a story about that. And that's part of a well-established series of cryptid fiction that's it's going to be like the 20th or 25th book in that series, and that will come out at the beginning of next year. So I have various things. I have various other ideas that I'm going to be developing into stories. I would like to write more short fiction. I've been writing books for quite a while now, so I'm going to go shorter again, I think, for a while and work on some ideas at the short fiction level.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. So it is like a fiction, cryptic fiction. So
yeah, the cryptids, yeah.
Yeah.
The cryptids are imaginary animals. They're like Bigfoot. They're like the Yeti or whatever it is. So there are animals where people have cited them, sort of like UFOs, I guess. So they're not part of mainstream science, but there is a strong core of people who believe these animals actually exist. And so I'm writing actually about a British cryptid. I'm not actually allowed to tell people what animal the book is about because that's supposed to be a surprise for the reader when the book comes out. But it is actually set in England. The title is Mad Dogs and Englishmen. So that's a bit of a clue. And so that is coming out at the beginning of next year. And that's because I was interested in the books that this particular publisher, Systema Paradoxa, and is part of eSpec Books. I was interested in the kind of fiction that they were doing, and I thought I could write one, and I pitched one. And so that I'm probably not going to go into cryptid fiction rather than alternate history, but it's sort of light relief, and it was fun to write.
That sounds very intriguing, sir.
Yeah. So that was fun.
Yeah.
A lot of irons in the fire. I do get a lot of ideas from travel, and I am going to be traveling a lot more since I'm now retired from NASA. I'm going to have more time to travel, so I'm sure that will spur some interesting story ideas as well. Go ahead.
That's very interesting, sir. Sir, earlier I asked you about the hard science fiction. So can we say that Interstellar is a hard science fiction?
Say which is?
Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Can we say that is a hard science fiction?
I think it is essentially a hard science fiction idea, and I think the ideas are worked out fairly well there. I mean, as a scientist, I can point at holes in the story or things that aren't quite right from the physics point of view. But I think I think one of the key things about that is getting over the idea that time actually does work differently when you're on an object like that, when you're on an object which has a high gravitational field. So I think the working out of the ideas about Einstein's theory about relativity and about time dilation and all of that kind of stuff, I think it is intriguingly worked out. And I think on that level, I think the story does work very well. And I do applaud the idea of getting as much hard science into science fiction as possible. I love the Star Wars movies, but there's a lot of things that happen in those movies that are just ignore science. Yeah. They really are fantasy. They ignore science altogether. Yeah. And so there's a lot of scientific science fiction. I do love it when I see a good movie that is strongly scientifically based, like Gattaca, for example, with the genetics and that kind of thing. I'm a strong fan of films like that.
Yep. So, what do you think about Interstellar?
Interstellar, I did enjoy it. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's been a while since I've seen it now, so I don't remember the details. But I think it's really good. I listen to this. That's one of the soundtracks I listen to all the time when I'm writing. I have a whole bunch of soundtracks that I listen to. So yeah, I towards the end, not to give any spoilers away, but there were some weird things that happened towards the end that I wasn't sure about. But overall, I did enjoy it, and I liked the characters and the playing out of it all.
That's interesting. I mean, I kind of imagine that which you said that you don't like some of the part which you are not sure is that how they put the quantum data through the bookshelves and all.
Yes, through the bookshelf. Yeah, it kind of went off the rails there scientifically for me. I could see what they were getting at there towards the end, and I thought it was a very powerful. As a metaphor, it was very powerful in terms of character development. And I think that's why it worked for me, because it did hit those buttons. I don't require that everything I see, I can be as escapist as anybody else. I can I do have willing suspension of disbelief if the person who makes the movie or writes the book kind of brings me in. And as I've been in that, I've invested in it by that time. So I thought that was very interesting from a meta, but largely from a metaphorical and philosophical than being hard science. So yes, I enjoyed it.
Yep. I can totally see an as a scientist perspective on Interstellar. Bit of it, definitely, yeah.
Yes.
So for me, I am the biggest fan of Christopher Nolan's work, and I mean, after watching Interstellar, actually, it inspired me to write my first science fiction. I am currently actually writing my first science fiction.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad that you were spurred on, and hopefully there'll be some hard science in your science fiction thing. No, I like
Yes.
Nolan quite a bit. I think that he makes very audacious movies. I think Tenet is the one where time is going
Yep, yep.
backwards for some people and forwards for others.
Reverse entropy.
Yes, I actually want to see that again sometime, and just now that I know what happens, see how it happens, and look into that a little more. And of course, I liked Oppenheimer as well. I watched that twice because
Yes.
I thought that was very well done in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yep, yep. So, sir, I just want to say something to you here is that I mean, wondering that just maybe you might be interested in writing a foreword for my book. I mean, of course, it's up to you. Once I done with the all, I will send it to you. If you like the story and all, then I'm just exploring. I just wanted to plant a little
Okay.
seed so that I mean, if it is
Sure.
something that you do open to consider.
Yeah, I could consider that. Yes, send it over, and I'll take a look
Yep, yep.
when you're at the point where you want to get other eyes on it. Yeah,
Yep, yep.
that would be fine.
I also asked us the same question to the Adina Maya. So she also said that, okay, once you're done, do send me. We will.
Yes, no, that's yes. Adina is actually local, of course, because we both live and work in the same area. So
Yeah,
I saw her a couple of months ago at a science fiction convention, and
yeah.
I think we actually had a table next to each other. Often at science fiction conventions, there'll be what's called a mass signing, where a lot of authors will have tables, and people can come and get their books signed and talk to the authors. And I was actually sitting next to Adina at the most recent. Am I going to remember which science fiction convention this was? I'm not sure, but it probably doesn't matter. Yeah. Anyway, I know it was a local science fiction convention very recently where she and I were sitting close together. I'm glad she's still doing well.
Yep, yep, yep.
Small world.
Of course. So, I mean, last year, actually, for the long time, I wanted to be a podcaster and wanted to be a writer. But last year, I started as a journey as a podcaster, and I started my long dream to be a writer. So, I'm really excited about it. I really can't wait to share with you and Adina ma'am. So, once I'm done with, I will be mailed to you.
Okay. All right. You have my
Yes.
contact info.
Yes. So, sir, we are on the final segment of our podcast.
Okay.
It is called Instant Insights. I will ask you some quick question and you have to answer as fast as you can.
Oh. Okay. See how much trouble I can get myself into. Okay. Go ahead. Fire away.
Okay, sir. So are you ready? Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Beach or mountain?
Mountain.
City or countryside?
Countryside.
Blue or green?
Ooh, blue.
Early bird or night owl?
Early bird, although I was a night owl when I was a kid.
Juice or smoothie?
Oh, juice, definitely.
Introvert or extrovert?
I am, despite the amount that I've been talking, I am actually well over on the introvert scale.
Most recent hobby that you picked up?
Most recent hobby that I picked up. Oh, gosh. I have a lot of hobbies. I sing, I do stuff. Oh, bread making, I guess. Since I retired, I've been doing quite a bit of bread making from scratch, not with a bread machine. I used to have a bread machine before, but now I actually make it with sourdough and all that stuff. Anyway,
Interesting.
bread making. Yeah.
One thing that makes you smile instantly?
Puppies? Penguins, I guess. Penguins, yes. I love penguins.
So same pinch. I also love penguins. What is your go-to stress relief method?
Stress relief method. Yoga. I do a fair bit of yoga as stress release. That would be the main one, I guess.
Best way to spend a weekend?
Writing, of course. But if I wasn't writing, I guess I would be traveling somewhere, touristing around, seeing something new that I haven't seen before.
Speaking about traveling, travel back in time or forward in time?
Back in time, I would have to say. I'm too curious about the past. I'm curious about the future as well, but I'm more afraid of that. So
Yep,
yeah,
yep,
I'd
yep.
go backwards.
Yep, yep. It is completely reflecting on your work.
Yeah,
Yes.
could see that one coming.
Yep. If you could visit any planet, which one would it be?
Hmm. I guess it would have to be Mars. Yeah.
What is the one thing you like to bring with you to Mars?
Well, obviously breathing equipment and a suitable accommodation to keep me so that my body wouldn't like explode or asphyxiate or something like that. And actually, if I had more time to think about it, I'd like to go to a planet around another star, not around our own star. So I'd have to figure out which of those exoplanets I'd want to go to. Assuming that all my natural needs were taken care of, I guess I would need a lot of books to read or suitable companions. So I'd need an excellent crew, of course.
Yep, yep, yep. If you could have any dinner guest, dead or alive, who would it be?
Ooh, it'd be tempting to say somebody like Julius Caesar or uh, the first one that comes to mind, actually, and I was supposed to answer quickly, so I guess I'll have to go for that one. I expect I'd be disappointed, but yes, I'd probably pick some famous Roman just to see how their mind worked, assuming I had a universal translator.
Yeah, I can totally see that. That is coming.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
probably there's one out there already, AI
Yep,
driven or
yep,
something.
yep. Best way to handle success.
Best way to handle success, not let it go to your head. Be modest and as humble about it as you can. And don't assume just because you've had one success that things will continue
Yeah.
successfully in the future because you might have a slump ahead of you.
And the opposite, best way to handle failure.
Um, Accept it and move on. Persevere. Life will hand you failures all the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rejection and failure involved in writing in particular. So,
Yep, yep,
but you got to try.
yep. Best gift you have ever received.
Uh, wow, that is a really hard one. I actually have no idea. No, you stumped me with that one. I have no idea what I would answer for that.
Yep, yep, yep. Sir, I hope you are not feeling bored because I have
No,
much more question
okay, well,
to it.
go ahead. No, I'm now going to think. In 20 minutes' time, I'm going to come up with the best thing I've ever received as a gift, but then it'll be
Okay,
too
okay,
late to tell you. Anyway,
okay,
carry
sir.
on.
Okay, sir. One thing that you like to learn.
Well, new facts from history, I think, would have to be the answer there.
What's the one skill you wish you learned early on in your career?
Early on in my career, well, early on in my life, I think I would like to be better at a musical instrument than I am. I play the guitar a bit, and I don't play any other musical instrument at all. So I guess I would like to be a virtuoso on some instrument or another.
Hmm. I just completely, forgot to ask you about that question. Actually, by
Mhm.
researching about this NASA stuff and your book, actually, I completely forgot that you are a singer as well.
Yes, yes, I sing with a group called The Chromatics. It's a
Chromatic.
six-person a cappella group. We've been together for some time. Mary, did you know that your baby boy will save our sons and daughters? Did you know that your baby boy has come to make you new? The child that you've delivered will soon deliver you.
Mary, did you know that your baby boy would give sight to a blind man? Mary, did you know that your baby boy would calm the storm with his hand? Did you know?
We sing all kinds of stuff. We sing a lot of originals that we write ourselves, and some of those originals are astronomically correct, as you might expect from me and others. Several of the others people also work at NASA or have done at some time or another. So we
Yeah.
have a whole bunch of astronomically correct songs called Astro Cappella, and we sing those. We've sung at the National Air and Space Museum and various other museums, in addition to festivals and science fiction conventions and other places that are completely unconnected to science. But yes, I do. I do sing in my spare time.
Hmm.
My spare time, again, in copious air quotes there.
Yep, yep, yep. So, sir, who inspired you the most?
I don't know. There's been so many people along the way. I've had a lot of good teachers along the way, a lot of historical characters or people who are historical now, like the astronauts. Carl Sagan was pretty influential, I guess. And Patrick Moore, who was a really eccentric British astronomer guy. Uh, Heinlein, because I read a lot of his stuff when I was young and inspired me to write. A lot of writers actually have inspired me along the way. Asimov, Ursula Le Guin, other people. Yes, it's
Yeah.
another one of those tough questions because so many. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
wow,
yeah.
how do I answer that?
Yep, yep. For me also, the Carl Sagan is also his work, the original Cosmos series, and then later the Neil deGrasse Tyson's Cosmos series actually shaped my interest toward this kind of stuff, the science stuff. And Yuval Noah Harari's book *Sapiens* also hit me so hard, I would say.
Yeah, yes, a lot of great science educators out there.
Yep, yep. Favorite book beside your own?
Favorite book besides my own? Well, I read 1491 several times. There's a really geeky book called How Apollo Flew to the Moon, which is full of scientific and technical information, which I really love. In terms of fiction, oh gosh, I really enjoyed Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars trilogy. I have to say that because those are really well done. They have really strong, compelling characters. It follows an epic period of time from Red Mars, which is when people are first landing on Mars, through to Green Mars and Blue Mars as they terraform the planet Mars over thousands of years. So I think those are the most impressive books. Those are the books that I would have to say are my favorites there. Also,
Interesting.
Lord of the Rings, though, just completely out of left field. I think Lord of the Rings I found very impressive when I was a kid. It doesn't stand up quite as well now, but the idea of writing something that inventive, I think I read both War and Peace and Lord of the Rings when I was about 12 years old, and those are obviously both huge books. And I was like, wow, those are both really amazing. Anyway,
Interesting. Favorite movie?
favorite movie. I don't know. This is going to sound weird, but I actually really enjoy the Highlander movie.
Highland.
It's fighting with swords. It's because it has historical flashbacks, and I've always found those appealing. And it is a fantasy setting, and it's ridiculous, but it's fun. So I did enjoy the Highlander movie quite a bit. And also in terms of absurd historical stuff, I kind of like Gladiator and also the Heath Ledger one about jousting, whatever that was called. So yes, I see. In terms of willing suspension of disbelief, I do like quite a lot of those historical but light-hearted things. Not that Gladiator is that light-hearted, but you know what I mean.
Yep, yep, yep. That's very interesting, sir. I mean, one thing I noticed that most of the scientists at your age, whenever they talk about the inspiring people and favorite books and all, they quite often or not, they pick the name of Carl Sagan.
And he was around at the right time in a lot of
Yeah.
our lives across the world, because of course I watched
Yeah.
the original Cosmos in England. We were just at that kind of formative years stuff,
Yeah.
and we were getting a lot of interesting data back from the planets in the solar system. A lot of people were obviously fascinated by the
Yeah.
views of Jupiter and Saturn that we were getting around about those times, and a lot of people were really into the space program and are really
Yeah.
into space and finding out about the rest of the solar system back in those days. I mean, I had an atlas, and I used to look at the front of that atlas. It was a world atlas. It was maps of the world, but in the frontispiece was the solar system, and so there are pictures of Saturn and Neptune and Uranus and Pluto, which was still a planet back in those days.
Yeah.
And I think back in those days they only knew of 12 moons around Jupiter and 10 around Saturn, and now we know there are scores around both planets, of course. But so Sagan came around at the right time to just scratch that itch, I think.
Yep, yep, yep. The Carl Sagan and also the moon landing, also kind of.
Yes, those were formative years for a lot of us, and a lot of people,
Yeah.
well, presumably everybody who works at NASA who is around my age remembers the moon landings and remembers them as an interesting and pivotal part of their lives. That's where a lot of us got really bitten by the space bug.
Yep, yep, yep. So, sir, are you excited about the Artemis mission? So
Yes, I am. I'm very happy that we're going back to the moon and
yeah,
with a slightly more diverse cast of characters than we did the first time around.
yeah,
So yes, we're going to put the first woman, the first person of color on the moon very soon. And yes, I think in the next couple of years we're scheduled to send one crew around the moon and back again. And actually, I know I mean, I wouldn't claim her as a friend of mine, but I've met Christina Koch, who is one of the astronauts on that mission. So that's going to be very exciting, and landing the crew back on the moon and presumably near the South Pole. So I'm following the Artemis stuff with great interest. Yes,
yeah,
that's going to be fascinating. I hope we follow through, and I hope we follow through soon and see Americans and humans on the moon again. There's a lot of interest in the moon, of course, now anyway, because a lot of other countries are also going there with the uncrewed Chinese missions and India and various other countries who've been trying
yeah,
to put landers on the moon. So
yeah.
it's time. It's time to go back.
Then eventually to go back. I mean, go to Mars. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yes, to go on to Mars. I think that is the human destiny.
yeah,
I'm kind of irritated that it hasn't happened sooner because NASA did have plans back in the early 1970s. NASA
yeah,
did have plans to go to Mars by the 90s. And when I was young, I actually believed I'd be living and working in space by the time I'm this age, by the time I was in my 50s or 60s. I
yeah,
just assumed that I would be able to leave the planet. And I'm kind of annoyed that I haven't been able to. That's kind of
yeah,
bugging me, but but at least we are still moving out. We've got beyond Earth orbit again, and we'll be going back to the moon in my lifetime.
yeah,
So that's good.
yep, yep. Sir, what do you think? Who is the, I mean, most prominent science face in today's world?
The most prominent scientist
Yeah,
or the
scientist.
science.
Yeah,
Oh, well, there are a lot of them. Science is a very collaborative adventure, actually, and so there are lots of people. There's science, and I think this is something that a lot of the lay public, a lot of your listeners probably know this, but a lot of other people don't. Is that science is a very collaborative, everybody's building on the work that comes before. You
yeah,
tend to think of science as being done by the Albert Einstein who discovers something that nobody's discovered before,
yeah,
or other people. Newton obviously was in a class of his own, but a lot of other scientists tend to be very collaborative. And if Einstein hadn't discovered the theory of relativity, there were other people around him who probably would have done. So it's actually very difficult for me to pin down the name of a scientist these days to think of somebody who I think stands out above everybody else.
last
But
was
no,
Stephen
tough
Hawking,
one.
but he is no more. So
Yeah, Hawking was amazing. Yes, he obviously had a great mind.
yeah. So sir, coming to your favorites, Android or iOS? Yeah.
iOS, yes. Oh, I'm a Mac guy all the way.
Okay.
I got my iPhone sitting here. I'm talking to you on a Mac computer. No,
Okay.
I'm all the way hard over iOS.
Okay. I should have figured it out from your earbuds. So yeah.
Yes, yes. You can see me. You have the advantage there
Yep. Yep. Yep.
of your viewers.
Most used app on your phone.
Most used app on my phone. Well, I use the driving one, Google Maps. I use that because otherwise I wouldn't find my way around. Otherwise, I also read a lot of books on the on the reading app, on the Kindle app on my phone. So I guess those are the ones. Plus Gmail, of course, and Weatherbug, which I'm looking at constantly right now because we have a big snowstorm taking place in the eastern US right now, right in front of my window. But yeah, so it's the Kindle app and the weather app and finding my way around.
So do the Apple Map is still bad?
I don't know. I don't use the Apple Maps app very often. There was a time when I was comparing the two. It was when my wife and I think, were out on a road trip, and it was right about the time of the total eclipse, and we were in Texas, and I was looking to see what Apple Maps did compared to what Google Maps did. And sometimes Apple Maps was actually more up to date on traffic jams and stuff like that than Google Maps was, but I still preferred the routes that were being given to me by Google Maps. But I don't know. I haven't done a side-to-side comparison often enough and in
Yeah.
enough different. I haven't done it in cities a great deal, which I think is where it really counts, being able to make sure you avoid traffic jams and
Yeah.
can find your way home, especially since I live just outside Washington, D.C., which has notoriously bad traffic.
Yep. Yep. So sir, if you weren't in space industry or a novelist, what would you be doing instead?
If I wasn't in the space industry or being a novelist, I'd probably be somewhere in the aero industry. I would imagine I'd probably still be in some scientific or technical field. Probably if I hadn't gone into astrophysics, may have gone into weather forecasting, kind of appropriate, meteorology, one of those kinds of things. Or I'd have gone towards the aerospace industry in a different way. I might have tried working I did actually apply to British Aerospace at one point when I was still living in the UK, but ended up coming to the States instead. So I made it more on the aircraft side of things. I don't think I'd have diverged a huge amount from that. I doubt if I'd be in a totally different industry, but I might be like in a related field somewhere.
So, if I'm not mistaken, earlier you mentioned that you are moving back to UK?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm not. I'm going back to yeah, I did say I was going back to the UK, but that's just for a 2-week trip. I'm going to visit my mother, who still lives in the house that I grew up in, actually. So I'm going back in a couple of days, but I'm only going to be there for a short space of time. No, I am. I grew up British, but I now have US citizenship, obviously, since I'm used to be a federal employee. You have to be a US citizen for that. And so, no, my main base will continue to be in the United States. I'm going to do a lot of traveling, but no, I'm not moving back to England.
So, sir, what's harder, writing a novel or analyzing astrophysics data?
Oh, I'd say analyzing astrophysics data. I think it's actually because it takes quite a long time, and in some ways it's quite frustrating to understand what you're looking at and figuring out what physical principles are and doing the math and then writing it in a comprehensible way. I've written a lot of scientific papers, and the challenge is always to make it tell a coherent and consistent story and get everything exactly right. So I would say writing papers is actually harder than writing fiction in that sense. It requires a lot more concentration. I actually write quite quickly when I'm writing fiction, and I write relatively slowly, faster than some scientists, but I write words slower than when I'm writing a science paper than when I'm writing fiction, that's for sure.
That's interesting. So it's like you're a born writer.
Yeah, there is yes, when you go into science, people often, I think, don't realize how much writing is involved in science, because you have to write proposals for data. You have to write funding proposals. You have to write the stuff up afterwards. If you're a manager, you have to write reports. You have to justify spending you've done. There's all kinds of reasons why being a good writer is useful in the science world.
Yep. It's a commitment also. Yep.
Yeah.
As you earlier said, that there's a perseverance and all needed to be a writer. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Very true.
Favorite project you have worked on?
Favorite project, I mentioned the Rossi X-ray Timing Explorer, which was a NASA satellite. I would have to say that is the favorite project I've worked on, just because it was fun to see all the new data coming down. I was in charge of what was known as the guest observer facility, and so we were helping other people analyze the data as it was coming down. And so I found that very fulfilling. That was a great part of my life. I also enjoyed being the director of the HEASARC, but I think in my working life at NASA, I think the RXTE time was the most fulfilling.
The favorite book that you have written?
Favorite book that I've written is always the one that I'm working on right now. But I would have to say that I really like the third book in the Clash of Eagles series. There are 3. There's Clash of Eagles itself, and Eagle in Exile is the second, and the third one is Eagle and Empire. And in that one, everything comes together, and it finishes with this gigantic battle out in the plains, in the northwestern plains of America. The books actually go all over the North American continent. They go down to the southwestern part of the US and where we now know as Chaco Canyon. So they range far and wide. And I really enjoyed writing that book. I wrote it fairly fast because I knew all the characters. I have a large cast of characters by that time, and I really enjoyed how everything came together and how all of that worked. And I thought it was a satisfying end to the trilogy. So weird to say, but I think my favorite book is the third in the Clash of Eagles trilogy.
And the one which you are currently writing? Yeah.
And the one which I'm currently writing, yes, which is, with all books you write, there's obviously a phase where it's a bit of a slog. These are long books. I tend to write longish books. And so I'm now 2/3 of the way through a book that's probably going to end up at about 160,000 words, which is longer than your average book. It's not out there in George R.R. Martin territory, but a lot of books are 90,000 to 110,000, and all of mine tend to be substantially thicker, bigger books than that. I write big books. So it's a lot of work.
Yeah. So speaking about your writing, so how is your writing style? I mean, since you are doing it full time now, so how often do you write?
Now I write as much of the day as I can. I'm generally writing about 40 hours a week now. Before I retired from NASA, I was writing 20 to 25 hours a week on top of the day job. So I now have a bit more free time. So yes, I do try to write as much as possible. I'm obviously doing more travel, doing more stuff that isn't writing. I'm going to be doing some shoveling later on in the snowstorm. But yeah, I tend to write. That is the amount I tend to write. And I do write quite quickly, get down a fair number of words. So I think I can write fairly quickly, but I also do a lot of editing. My writing style is that I tend to write the first draft as quickly as possible, and then a lot of the work comes in when I'm editing that and figuring out which ideas have worked and which ones haven't, and melding it into a coherent whole and changing things that don't work and fixing things up and all of that. So the editing, the second draft actually is a lot harder work than the first draft.
Oh, so what comes first for you, plot or characters?
Generally the plot for the Vivian Carter novels. I knew that I wanted to write about the Apollo program. That the time had come to actually write the book that I'd always wanted to write about the Apollo program. And then the characters followed fairly quickly after that, but I knew the setting. So I think the setting comes first. I knew that I wanted to write Romans in North America at the time of the Mississippian culture. So the concept came first, and then the character population. It's like, who are the most interesting characters who can populate this world? What are the problems they have? Who are the other characters around them? What are the conflicts they're going to have? And I build it up from there.
Interesting. So, sir, how do you deal with writer's block?
Writer's block normally means that I'm doing something wrong. In my case, it's not because I can't think of what to write. It's because I'm writing something that isn't coming correctly. There was a section that I was writing in the second book of the Clash of Eagles series, and I was just stuck on that for a long time. And I realized eventually that the reason was that my characters were acting out of character. Because of the plot, I was forcing the characters to do things that in real life, they wouldn't have done. And as soon as I realized that, I went back to the characters and was like, okay, well, I'm blocked because I'm being stupid. What would the characters actually do? How would that affect the plot? So I let the characters then tell me what they would have done, and then work the plot around that. That's happened in other things that I've written, that I've gotten jammed on a section, or there's a scene that I'm having trouble writing, and it's usually because it's not a realistic enough scene, that I'm essentially messing something up, and that it's not coming. The writing isn't coming because it just doesn't feel right to me, and subconsciously I know I'm forcing a square peg into a round hole. And once I realize that, I know how to fix it. I'm very rarely blocked because I don't know what to write or how to write a scene. I'll generally sketch something down, even if I know it's not the last word. I'll try something. I'll try things a couple of ways. I'll try a scene 2 different ways and figure out best which way works best. But I very rarely get writer's block unless, like I just said, it's because I'm writing the wrong thing.
Interesting. So, sir, speaking of the character, how do you name your character? I mean, for the Rome series, the Eagle series, I can understand that the most of the character would be the known character. But in the Apollo Rising, is there any way or system you follow to name the character?
Not really. I write down a bunch of names, and eventually one of them will just seem right. Vivian Carter, her name just seemed right. I had a bunch of different names, but hers seemed right. And then I want to get names, there's a pragmatic side of this, which means that the names have to be as different as possible. You don't want 2 people with 2 similar names, otherwise it's going to get confusing. Some names require quite a bit of research. For the Russian characters, the Apollo Rising series actually does have cosmonaut characters, and you see things from their point of view. So I had to figure out the Russian naming scheme, and had to make sure that those were names that obviously there's a lot of real Russians whose names you can look at and see how the names go together, the names and the patronymics. And so I put a bunch of those down into a file, and I was thinking of what character names would work best for my characters. For the Native American characters, I had to figure out what kind of names they would be, what kind of people they would be. And there are a lot of books which have Native American characters which have what seem to me to be fakey sounding names, like, I don't know, something that is an English transcription of what the Native American name would be. And it's probably fine if you have the real Native American version, but it ends up sounding like man with many weapons, or whatever it might be, old, whatever his name might be, who's the prophet. So my names are actually based on actual Native American names. With some research, it looks like the people who lived in Cahokia then moved on. They moved outwards to become the Lakota and Dakota tribes. So I ended up using a lot of names from that culture as Cahokian characters because they would have been the precursors of the people in those tribes and nations in the later American landscape. So I actually did a lot of work on those to make sure that they were names that meant something, but were names that were also like true to the actual culture that I was writing within. So those are the ones where the names really took me a length of time because I wanted names appropriate to the characters. So I have children. There are actually 3 children in these books who grow up to play a great part, and they're Cahokian children. And the second one is, for example, is called Kimimea, which is a real Lakota name, and it means butterfly because that kind of suits her character. And Tate, who is older, and Enepe, who is younger, they also have names that sound true to the culture they're in, but also mean something. And the reader doesn't necessarily need to know that, but I like to know it, and I like to think that it is sort of an interesting part of the characters.
That's very interesting. So, sir, while you're creating a fictional character, do you prefer to follow a real person, or you just make out completely out of scratch?
For the books that haven't been published yet, I mentioned they feature Hypatia of Alexandria, who's a real historical character. And I knew, actually, you mentioned what comes first. In her case, the character did come first because I knew I wanted to write specifically about her and about her as a problem solver.
Alternative history, yeah. It makes sense, yeah.
So yes, in her case, I was using historical character. There are a couple of historical characters that come up later in the Clash of Eagles series. I do have some named real astronauts in the astronaut books. They're not major characters, but they're there to provide veracity. They're there because they are doing the things that they would have been doing in our real universe in this different timeline. So Michael Collins makes an appearance, and Charlie Duke and some of the others. So there I know I want to have real characters in the mix. But there are no real life characters so close to the current time that I felt comfortable using as major characters in those. I mean, apart from people like, obviously, Reagan is the president, and there are real people, Andropov and others in the USSR. So there are real named politicians in there. So by and large, like in the short story that I mentioned earlier on, which is published in an anthology called Tales from Alternate Earths, which was about the gunpowder plot. I knew Guy Fawkes was going to be a major feature in that one, so I do have a realistic historical character there. So I guess it kind of all depends. By and large, I would rather use fictional characters, but every now and then I'm in a situation where Guy Fawkes or Hypatia of Alexandria calls out to me, and I know they're the people that I want to base the story around. They're the real life people who need to be in this work of fiction.
Yep. So, one thing you like to change about Apollo program in real life?
Well, obviously, I'd like it to keep going. I would like 3 astronauts to not have died on the ground in the Apollo 1 fire when we lost Gus Grissom and Ed White and Roger Chaffee. So I would want fewer people I would want them not to die. I wish Jim Lovell had his chance at walking on the moon in Apollo 13. I think it's a shame that mission, that he didn't get to go to Fram Arrow and walk on the moon with Fred Hayes. So those are things I would change. Obviously, a big thing that I would change is I would want it to continue. I'd have wanted the American public to remain interested, for Congress to keep funding it, and for us to have got much further on in exploring out into the solar system by now. So all of those would be wishes of mine for a slightly different Apollo program.
Yep. Sir, you have seen the world both before and after the digital age, the pre and post-internet era.
Yes, I'm that old, yes.
Based on your vast experience, what are the things that your generation has that new generation lacks?
I am actually very glad that I grew up at the time when I did. I'm actually glad that when I went to college, when I went to Oxford, that we weren't able to text and we weren't taking photos all the time on our phones. It kind of makes it, I'm sure it would have been a very different experience if we'd had those things. In a way, I'm glad the internet waited on all of that until I personally was ready for it. And that was obviously in my 20s and 30s, the internet and email came in. So I think people of my age, a number of us, I'm going to generalize wildly here. It's not true of everybody at all, but I do find that people of my age can sometimes concentrate more easily because we're used to not having distractions, and so we can ignore those distractions when they're not there. That is one thing. I'm glad that I was young when young enough, at least, when a lot of these digital technologies came along, because I was young enough to be able to understand them. So, I can put apps on my own phone. I'm not afraid of the technologies. Whereas my mother, for example, and other people who are older than me, they're often a little bit, they're hesitant about this technology. They're afraid of it. It came along too late in their lives. They may be able to figure out how to order groceries online, or they may not. It's not instinctive for them. I had a job involving a lot of IT, and so I was in a technological world as well as having the iPhone in my own. Before that, a BlackBerry in my life. So technology doesn't. I don't fear technology. I'm not afraid to mess around with it until I figure out how to make it work for me. And I think the slightly older generation does have a bit of an issue sometimes in that respect. So I think concentration, I think the older you get, the more you understand about the world around you. And that's obviously going to be true of every generation. But yeah, concentration and a memory of when things were different, I think is something that my particular age group has.
That's very true, sir. And today's generation, I mean, the newer generation, the Gen Alpha and all, so often they refer it the iPad generation. They have so much distraction around them. I mean, I was glad that when I was small, the internet situation not that wild as it is today.
Okay, you too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that was very valuable for us at that time, for me at that time as well. So there are the distractions. There's also the positive side, which is the community side.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are minorities, or who are uncertain of themselves, or who have various issues. It's easier for them in this world to find their community if the people they're living among are not like them, if they're different sexually or whatever it may be. It can be much easier for them to find a community and find support. And I think that is something that's very valuable that people in my generation did not have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sir, what do you think? The opposite, the vice versa. What are the things that the younger generation has that your generation lack, apart from the technological thing?
I think they have, in a way, a better sense of the world. I think you can't really divorce it from technology, because I think people are a lot more well informed in a lot of ways than they were. Like in my parents' generation, there were only a couple of TV channels, and you had to go to the library to find out information. And I remember those times because that's what it was like when I was growing up. And so I think access to information is something the younger generation has. In terms of it's kind of difficult. I know there are a lot of young people who don't read as much as the older generation used to. People of my age read a lot of books, and I think possibly I know of a lot of people in the younger generation who have difficulty sustaining the concentration to get through books. And so that's obviously a negative, and you're asking me for a positive. So it's a little hard, but I think the connectivity that younger people have, I think it's hard to divorce that from the digital world that they're in. I think they probably have a much greater sense of the potential that's out there, and they're probably not afraid of the gig economy and going out and making a life for themselves in an independent way that probably would have been alien to the generations above them. So that's a positive. But I'm thinking about it on the fly. That's what I have so far.
Yeah. So, sir, I have only 2 questions left.
Okay.
What is the best compliment you have ever received?
I think the best compliment the best compliment I ever received was the blurb that is actually on the front of the Hot Moon book, where Larry Niven, who is a science fiction writer that I've admired all my life, it's a longer quote, but the short version is, I loved it. And he really enjoyed Hot Moon. And I would never have imagined several things about my current life. I would never have imagined that I would have so many good friends who are actually famous authors, famous writers. They're now kind of my peer group, although I still feel a bit of imposter syndrome of being up there. But yes, so that was a great compliment. But I actually love it whenever anybody says that they really enjoyed reading my books, even if they're not Larry Niven. It could be anybody. People who come up to me at a science fiction convention saying they love my books, or that my books have helped them, have changed the way that they've thought. Or I had people who read the Clash of Eagles book 3 times and said it really changed their idea about, this is going to sound weird, it really changed their idea about other cultures and about coming to grips with different cultures or whatever it was. So, yeah. So that was a very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Yeah. So talking about the writing, I would like to ask you something is, do you think the writing about science will inspire future scientists?
My writing?
I know, writing in general.
I think so. I think so. I think it's my writing and other people's writing. I think people are really affected by the world around them, and if there's a lot of good fiction out there, a lot of good science fiction. I think writing and reading are immensely important anyway. I think reading helps teach you empathy. It helps teach you about people who are not like you or who are facing problems that you don't have, and it helps you to empathize with people. I'm always slightly worried or not suspicious, but concerned a little, I guess, of people who don't read at all. And I find it hard to imagine what their worldview is like, quite honestly, because so much of my worldview comes from reading fiction, reading nonfiction, reading about stuff I don't know. So I think that's immensely important. So yes, I do think science writing, I'm always keen to hear about good new science writers and good new fiction authors. And I'm glad there are still people writing, and I'm glad there are still people reading.
Yep. Absolutely, sir. I mean, in today's generation, especially the newer generation, Gen Alpha, I belong to the Gen Z and the late Gen Y. Gen Y and Gen Z are kind of, escaped the distraction a bit. I won't say that completely, but kind of bit of they have dodged the distraction trap. But but the Gen Alpha, I'm really feeling, they are really have to struggle with the distraction. Everywhere they have to struggle to concentrate. As you mentioned earlier. Yeah.
They have to struggle. And I do hear from a lot of friends of mine who are teachers that it's difficult in the classroom as well, because kids get distracted so easily and they don't work through exercises the way they used to.
Yeah.
And so teachers are having to adapt to that as well. And that's a whole different subject. But yes, education is changing with the years as well, as people are adapting to new kinds of learning and stuff.
Yeah. Whenever people pick a novel, let's say earlier you said an example that you love Lord of the Rings. So today's generation, they see that the Lord of the Rings translated into the movie, so they rather prefer the movie than the books.
Yes, and I have seen threads of people online saying, I don't know why anybody would read. These are people who appear to be like very smart people. They're like, I don't know why anybody would read nowadays. It seems kind of old fashioned when there are so many other forms of entertainment. And I just want to curl up in a ball when I see things like that, of course, personally because I'm a writer, but also because it's so far away from my own view of the world. So it's kind of tragic in a way. And that's not taking anything away from these other mediums like movie. There's a lot of really good smart movies. There's a lot of really good smart video games. There's a lot of good culture out there. But people who don't read, I think, are missing a part of the culture that I think is very valuable.
Yep. So Sal, one last question.
Okay.
What is the best piece of advice that you have ever received?
I think to persevere and not give up on what you want. And that's, I think I've done that all my life. I wasn't necessarily the top of my class at school, but I ended up getting into Oxford because I worked hard. So I think it's the same with writing. I think we mentioned earlier on that a lot of other people who I knew are not writing anymore. I am, because I couldn't stop myself. I really wanted to be a writer. I kept driving on. And so I think perseverance is the one thing that the one thing that I got from other people. Other people taught me to persevere.
Yep. So, thank you, sir. That's the end of the podcast. Any final thought?
No, thank you very much. It's been great to be on, and it was a very wide-ranging conversation, and I love that. And we had the chance to talk a whole bunch of different things, from AI to education to and we got to talk about my books, and that was fun. And I hope people will go and look them up. My website is alansmale.com, so it's just www.alansmale.com, and I'm on various social media. I'm on Facebook and Blue Sky, so people can find me if they want to find out more about me or the books or anything. And I do welcome people writing to me. So there we are. That's it. I was very happy.
Yep, sir. You mentioned Blue Sky, not Twitter. So you are really... I'm also
on Twitter, but I do spend a little bit more time on Blue Sky for various reasons. But a lot of writers are actually on Blue Sky. A lot of writers have left Twitter and moved to Blue Sky. So that's why I'm on there as opposed to, say, Threads. It's just because most of my people are there.
It's no wonder. Since Elon took over, many people left Twitter. Yep.
Yes, they did. Hello, everyone. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe to Shree's podcast, The Billion Insights. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please take a moment to rate us 5 stars if you enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey and insight with us today. Your insight took us on a journey through space, history, and imagination. Your work as a scientist and storyteller is truly inspiring, and we are excited to see what comes next from you. We wish you good health and happiness.
Thank you very much indeed. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you for taking the time to be with us, sir. And to our listener, if you want to learn more about Alan Smale and his work, be sure to check out his books. You can find all the links in the description. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you see you next time on the Billion Insight podcast. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious. This is Shree, your host, signing out. Peace. So, sir, that's the end.